And from a political science lens, one thing I thought was interesting were the implications of acquiring the land and eminent domain. In the Charlestown project, you mentioned a phone call where someone threatened to sue you, and how you tried to diffuse that tension, and how in the project you weren't hoping to plan to use eminent domain for any of the land acquisition, which I just think is interesting and a stickly issue when acquiring land.
Yep. Thank you, Forrest. Nice to meet you.
Lexi. Are you there, Lexi?
Yes, hi. My name is Lexi, and I'm a junior biology major. And I really liked learning about like the psychology behind like a community that's went through a flood. And then I also really liked the recyclable greenway. I thought that was really cool, and I hope that maybe in the future that can be more popular. And I'm with Clarksville.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Luke McFarlane.
Hi, my name is Luke McFarlane. I am a senior individualized major. I'm pre-pharmacy. The Rivertown I'm working with is Jeffersonville. And one of the main things about the Greenway that really spoke to me was how important it is to celebrate culture and diversity, how it's available to all citizens without prejudice. That was a huge part in the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan I looked at for Pennsylvania. And I just really liked how you all listened to the concerns of the residents and also fit the designs to suit the interests of them as a community.
Yep. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
The other Luke.
Hi there, my name is Luke Schroeder, and I'm a junior biology major, and I'm working with Jeffersonville as well. I really liked the idea of kind of creating a community around the Greenway, like with Grand Forks and East Grand Forks, especially how easy it was to attract to Cabela's, which you kind of think corporate conglomerates are hard to attract, but I guess it's easier than you think. And then I was a fan of I like the Appalachian Trail, and I've looked into it. So the idea of being able to kind of bike equivalent that was really cool.
Yep. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Luke.
Mohammed.
Hey, I'm Mohammed Haq. I'm a senior biology major, and I'm with New Albany. One thing that I thought was really cool was that, like, you know, the variety of things you cover in your book. So you cover a whole bunch of different topics, not just focusing on the biological aspect or you know, what happens after certain situations. So I thought that was really cool.
Thank you, Mohammed. Nice to meet you.
Sean. You're on mute, Sean. There you go.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Hey, awesome. My name's Sean. I'm a senior neuroscience major. I'm working with Jeffersonville as well. And one thing that I found really interesting, I'd never heard of Warren Manning's 1919 like national green infrastructure project. I thought that was really interesting. I'm kind of disappointed something like that still hasn't happened yet.
Yep. Yep. Good observation. Nice to meet you.
Stevie.
Hi, you're gonna have to bear with me. I'm on my roommate's kind of laptop because mine's broken, but I am Stevie. I'm a senior biology major with a track in genetics, and I think a part I found really interesting was on the chapter about like the Grand Canyon, talking about like making it more accessible to like people with disabilities and stuff. You never really think about that until it comes down to it, and like making a national park accessible just seems kind of difficult.
Yeah, it was challenging. Nice to meet you, Stevie.
Vin.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Vin. Hey.
Hello, my name is Vin Pham. I'm a sophomore accounting student, and I'm working with New Albany. And the one thing I'm really interested about while reading it was the economic implications of a greenway, and given that a greenway can help revitalize an underserved community that really had no other industry. So a greenway would really help revitalize that area and kind of bring in more money environmentally wise.
Yep. Yep. Good observation, Vin. Nice to meet you.
Zach.
Hello, my name is Zach McConnell. I'm a senior biology major, and I'm working with New Albany as well. And one thing I really keyed on in your book was in Grand Forks, how the citizens were concerned with paying for the Greenway and how they're going to keep up with it, because New Albany is going to be right beside the Origin Park, which is going to be 600 acres. And they also want to expand the Ohio River Greenway up Silver Creek. So that's going to be a big concern for their community members.
Yep. Nice to
All
meet
right.
you.
That's the class, and we have Russ online, who is our co-instructor. Russ, do you have any comments to make before we introduce Mr. Flink?
Oh, you're on mute. Russ, here you go. Yep.
I'm glad to have this opportunity for you to talk to our class, and glad to meet you, and hopefully we'll actually see the Louisville Loop someday.
Absolutely, Russ.
Well, I've not known Mr. Flink for a long time, but in the past year, I've gotten to really appreciate the depth of his work across the United States with trails and greenways and basically planning communities for the future. I got introduced to Mr. Flink by a man named Gordon Garner, who used to run our sewer district. Gordon was a futuristic guy who really thought about landscape design, community planning, and our natural resources. And he entertained a contract with the company that Mr. Flink still runs, and this was 30 years ago or so, to think about the Ohio River and to develop a Ohio River master plan that has partially been adopted, and really how Louisville thinks about the river and how we can interact with it more. He also developed the preliminary pieces around our Louisville Loop of thinking about greenways, and that is still going on today. You know, so when we think about the implementation of these plans, just because it doesn't happen tomorrow doesn't mean it won't. Now, it is a frustrating part to many people because, you know, the initial greenways along Beargrass Creek were proposed 30 years ago. Yeah. And just now, the Army Corps of Engineers and the Metropolitan Sewer District are spending $3 million to think about the restoration and recreational uses of a greenway along Beargrass Creek. 30 years later, and we're still studying it with a $3 million grant. And so, but that's not to say that these plans are not purposeful or useful or engaging, but I just can't comprehend the ability that Mr. Flink must have to deal with the, you know, the long-term nature of it, and the realization that not every good idea gets done. But with that, I'm going to turn the show over to Mr. Flink and look forward to the next half hour. And please make sure we keep track of chats. And one of the pieces that we're going to do is sort of have a discussion afterwards. And so I encourage everybody to make at least 2 chats, you know, questions, observations, you know, relationships to your river town. Just to let you know, Chuck, all of the students each have their river town, and they are meeting with the tourism offices and the elected officials in about 2 months from now. And so it's the same type of deal. We aren't going to, you know, write a grant for building a new trail tomorrow. But we have an opportunity, we have a window to talk with the elected officials and the leadership about both the value of greenways, the value of recreation, but also the value of synergism, of how we can work together with other river towns, and that might even bring more attention to it. Yep. So with that, I look forward to your comments, and
thank you. Great. David, thank you so much. And it's so nice to meet all the students. And I know that we all wish we would be there in person. I also am a adjunct professor. I teach at North Carolina State University. I teach a class there called the Landscape Imperative, which is looking at the future of North Carolina with a target year of 2050. So we're trying to look into the future careers of the students that we're teaching and talk about some of the challenges they're going to face. but I'm so honored to have a chance to make this presentation to you today. When I started putting this book together and was finalizing what the book would be named, came up with the Greenway Imperative, my publisher challenged me. And she said, you know, are you sure that greenways are an imperative? Are they really an urgent and crucial, essential thing? And I was so blessed to have former president of the Rails to Trails Conservancy and a very good friend of mine, Keith Laughlin, write the foreword for the book, in which he said, you know, greenway development is a single placemaking strategy that produces multiple benefits by improving the economic, social, environmental health, and the personal health of residents. They create healthier places for healthier people. And of course, we launched the book right into the midst of the pandemic. The book was published and released in March of this year, and the pandemic struck. And boy, have we seen what a critical and imperative thing greenways have become for Americans and really people all over the world. And I was struck by this quote that John Malellam wrote in the New York Times right around March or April, right as this pandemic was beginning. And he said, you know, little of what we're being told to do feels particularly heroic or world-changing or nearly enough to satisfy an anxious mind. But for a lot of us, it is in fact the job that's in front of us right now, the role that these disordered circumstances are calling each of us at a minimum to play. And what John was referring to was the need to socially distance, to wear masks, you know, to be kind and respectful of our fellow Americans. And you know, as you guys can see, I mean, over the last 8 to 9 months, it's been a challenge to do even that. But greenways have become a refuge landscape during this period of time. We have seen record use of greenways all across the country. I would say on average, we've seen 200% year over year use on particular segments of greenway, and we've seen some greenways that have had 600% increase in use. So they've become essential landscapes. They've become an imperative for many people that have access to them. And I'm so glad that David is focused his class on studying this subject, especially for the Ohio River and all of the communities up and down the river, because these are really important landscapes for many of the reasons that you all listed during your introductions. But certainly during this period of the last 8 to 9 months, you know, greenways have become a landscape where we can go, we can socially distance, we can be outdoors. In fact, you know, what we've sort of seen with greenways is how high the demand really is across the country. Communities where the greenways exist are being overwhelmed by use. And it's sort of painted a need, even a more dramatic need for greenways going forward. The history of where this all comes from is rooted in health and wellness. Back into the mid-1800s, Frederick Olmsted, who was the father of landscape architecture, and before he really took on the role of getting involved in landscape design, Olmsted headed up the Sanitation Commission during the Civil War. So he knew that there was this link between good public health, community design, and outdoor public space. And when he teamed with Calvert Vaux to create a master plan for what has been called Central Park in New York, which their submittal was called Greensward, which was green grass. It was it was an incredibly radical approach to thinking about public space in cities and the need for nature within a city and within communities. In fact, Olmsted very early on called Central Park, his plan, Greensward, the lungs of the city of New York. So he recognized that there had to be green space where citizens could go and they could be in sort of nature, even if it was reconstructed nature, and revel in this sort of outdoor space. But beyond that, and one of the students pointed this out, what he really framed was this democratic space, that a city park would be a landscape that would mix all the masses without regard to social hierarchy. So, you know, if you were wealthy, you had your country estate, and if you lived in the city and you were wealthy, you had your private garden. But if you were just the average person who was alive in America in the 1850s, you had no access to public space. So this was a really brand new idea. A public space that would address health and wellness, public space that was democratic, that would mix all the masses together, and this bringing of nature into the city. And really, that's the framework by which we really build greenway systems today, you know, more than 150 years later. we've been focusing on the benefits of greenways and trails for many, many years. COVID has really, been a laser-like focus on how important it is to address human health and wellness, and not just physical, just the physical access and wellness to outdoor spaces, but equally as important, mental health and wellness. And mental wellness is becoming more of an issue today as COVID continues to drag on and really continues to wear on the American psyche. So greenways are important in that regard. But as some of you have picked up about the book, we're concerned more than just about the human health. We're concerned about the environmental and ecosystem health of our planet. Ecologist Aldo Leopold said, what's good for our body is good for our ecosystems. And what he was trying to do was to tie human health to environmental health. And he went on in the San County Almanac to say, we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. And that is really evident today as we consider the biosphere, Earth's biosphere that we live in. Now, as human beings, we're 5 to 6 feet tall, and we think of this biosphere as being vast and infinite. But, when you eject yourself off the planet, as the astronauts did in the 1960s, and you look back, you realize how thin the layer of biosphere really is. It's an incredibly thin layer of life. And it's the only zone of life that we know to exist anywhere in the universe. We have no evidence to suggest that this richness of life, which is our biosphere, exists anywhere. And I'm not talking about microbial life that might exist on Venus or Mars, or some planet in a distant solar system. So it's pretty amazing. And that's why there's such a focus today on One Health concept. COVID has really brought this into focus, that we really need to think about the connections between human health, ecological health, the health of plants and animals, and how that is all interconnected. We don't live apart from nature. We are a part of nature. And I really wanted to bring a focus to this in the book with the Recycled Greenway, because the amount of pollution that's going on all across the planet. And I feel like this is one of the really big imperatives for the future. And I'm glad that several of you picked up on it. And I'm with you. I'm hopeful that it's a wake-up call to realize that trash, what we consider trash, is really a resource for the development of a future life, of future human life. We've got to do a much better job of cleaning up the pollution that's already exists, and figuring out a way to use that and harness that to build the facilities of the future, whether it be simple greenway trails like we point out in the book, or whether it's buildings, different parts of the great infrastructure that we live in society today. So that was definitely, one of the focuses of the book. You'll notice, as you read the book, that there's a lot of focus on conservation. And I know that a couple of you picked up on that as well. And I've found in my 35-year career that where I've had success in talking about conservation with residents, with citizens of this country, is to talk about water, wildlife, and lifestyle. And when I was challenged with that lawsuit in Charleston County, and I told the guy I didn't really respond well to it, I assured him that, he was really in control of the subject. We weren't going to use condemnation because we didn't feel like we had to. We didn't have to use police power. I was saying to him, you're a fan of water, you're a fan of wildlife, you're a fan of lifestyle. And it turned out that, he became one of the big champions of our work. I also like to point out that despite all the political acrimony, and we're in the midst of an election cycle, and it's brutal, and there's all kinds of stuff going on, but we've had one of the greatest pieces of legislation that's been enacted by Congress in maybe the last 3 to almost 4 decades, and that's the Great American Outdoor Act. That's really interesting when you think about how polarized the two-party system is in America, and how people are at each other's throats over politics, but yet we come together when we think about the need to preserve and protect our outdoors, to make it more accessible, to make it more meaningful in our lives. And the Great American Outdoors Act does that. So yeah, the book focuses a lot on conservation, and I wanted to feature some projects that really were hallmarks, in my opinion, of conservation. One of those being the Ann Springs Close Greenway in Fort Mill, South Carolina, very, very small town. But here's the woman who's the matriarch, who's the real champion of this. She is now 94 years young. I've been working with her for 29 years. She asks me all the time, you know, how many clients have you worked with for 29 years? And I remind her, well, you're the only one. And this is the picture that my wife and I just took with her last weekend. We were down celebrating the 25th anniversary of her Greenway, which is this 2,100 acre conservation park south of Charlotte, North Carolina. And, you know, just a fabulous, fabulous example of what we can do, what we can achieve. We can invite people to use landscapes in, you know, healthy ways. We can make them available for education, you know, for outdoor resources, but we can also make them a part of conservation. And Miss Close really revels in this accomplishment as, you know, for future generations. She talks all the time about young kids, about children, about how she wants them to grow up with access to the same kind of resources that she had as a child and as an adult. So that, you know, that's the future of conservation. And then the project that I think one student brought up was the Greenbelt program. You know, that was a pretty amazing project. I won't really go into a lot of details of it, other than to say, you know, it's one of the most successful local conservation programs anywhere in the country. So I'm glad that you read that chapter and enjoyed that story. You know, the bigger issue I think facing this country and really all across the planet is global warming. I talk about this a lot in my landscape imperative class. You know, for those who want to deny that there's any global warming going on, if you want to deny that, then you have to deny the fact that there was an industrial revolution and that you live in a modern society. Because the fact that we've been burning coal and oil, you know, for more than, you know, 100 plus year, 150, 160 years is why we have a modern society. But there's been a consequence. The release of all that CO2 is been trapped and is causing the planet to warm. And that's having severe consequences, as you guys can see. I mean, we're living in an era where we're experiencing the downside of global warming. The planet is warming overall. We're getting increased rainfall in more or less the Midwest, the eastern part of the United States, and the West is really drying out. And, you know, we have all the wildfires that have been going on this year up and down the West Coast of the United States. So there are implications, and it's unfortunate that we can't agree to follow the science, that we have to politicize the issue of global warming, because politicizing it isn't helping all the communities that are being impacted by it. It's very real, and we really should be focusing a lot of effort and attention on impact to shoreline communities, of which the Ohio River is a part. You know, the Ohio River is a big shoreline community, a set of communities. And what we're seeing, interestingly enough, is not only that we have the impact of global climate change and more impact to shoreline communities, but also that we have more and more people moving into shoreline communities. So across the world, almost half of the world's population now lives in shoreline communities. And in this country, nearly 40% of our population lives in shoreline communities. So we've got more people living in harm's way than ever before, and we're having a greater impact from global climate change. So yes, I did include a project in the book. It talked about how greenways can become a mitigating factor. And it is, I think it is a good project for you all to use or to think about as you're working with the various towns and communities along the Ohio River. They're almost guaranteed to flood. They have flooded in the past. This was the motivation for Gordon Garner hiring me to come to Louisville in the early 1990s, was to help him figure out, as the director of the Metropolitan Sewer District, you know, how do we create a more sustainable strategy for managing the fact that we're going to flood? And the backstory of the Greenway in Grand Forks was that the Army Corps of Engineers called me after the flood. It was not in their bailiwick to do a Greenway strategy, but they were told by Congress to do that. And so they got the book that I had written at that time in the early 1990s, Greenways, A Guide to Planning, Design, and Development. And I came in and helped form a strategy for a 2,000-acre greenway that was meant to really absorb the impacts of flooding. I was not very well liked during this process. I mean, it was a tough contract for me because many of the citizens didn't get it. The Grand Forks leadership didn't get it, and it was a difficult process to be a part of. But the end result was fantastic. The Greenway has been very successful. It's really redefined the way that people view their community. This is the green space that was created. It's really fantastic. It gets programmed for all kinds of use throughout the year. What's fascinating to me about this community is that they have all these different programs and events that take place within this greenway. And so in that regard, I think it's a good model for many of the communities along the Ohio River to look at how Grand Forks was able to basically transfer a liability into an asset. And, you know, yes, it still floods. In fact, there's been several flood events that have approximated the 1997 flood. So it's designed to flood. But for the most part of the year, you know, it's really a landscape that's used. And the Corps of Engineers, I don't know if they did this with a lot of enthusiasm, but they came around and admitted, you know, that this is probably the best example that they have, that they know of in the country, where the flood protection has become a public amenity and delivered real value back to the community. Another topic that has been front and center during the last 8 months is the issue of racism. I sort of refer to systemic racism as the cancer on the soul of the American society. We've got to do something to overcome this. We haven't put enough concentrated effort. And it's, systemic racism is going to be addressed and resolved by white America, despite all of the efforts by people of color to protest systemic racism. It's going to be white America that ends it. So we're the, we're the ones that have to really overcome all of the history of this country. And when people say to me, well, what do you think that makes America great? What I will tell you is that what makes this country great is the fact that we do celebrate the diverse culture and all the different ethnicities that are part of this country. We are the melting pot of the world. This is a shot from downtown Springdale, Arkansas, where we have an Hispanic community and a Marshallese community. It's the largest group of Marshallese people outside the Marshall Islands, and they live in Springdale, Arkansas, and they work at the Tyson chicken processing plants. Well, as we were building this greenway, many of the white people that we were dealing with were saying, well, we like the greenway, but we don't want those people to use it. And we kind of shot back, hey, those people are going to use it. We're building it for all people. And I think when you consider the culture of American society, it is influenced. I mean, the food we eat, the entertainment we enjoy, the sports that we participate in are all influenced by people of color and communities of color. And that's what makes American society so much fun, so rich. So it's disturbing to me that we have so much racism going on in America today. And I look at my 25 years of working on greenways in communities of color as one of the great joys of my life in terms of bringing the benefits of greenways to different communities. And this is the Razorback Greenway, 36 miles in total length, that I worked on with the Walton Family Foundation. And it was a real joy to work on this project. And some of the benefits that came out of that was the ability to connect people, through walking and bicycling to their community. And we connected these schools that were located along a portion of the greenway together that enabled people to walk and bike, from their homes to these public schools. In fact, we connected 21 public schools with this 36-mile greenway. One of the unintended consequences that occurred was that we were able to connect these minority neighborhoods, these neighborhoods of communities of color, to these public schools. And we did not realize this was going to happen, but parents were then taking turns walking huge groups of kids to and from school. And I remember going out and asking them, how they were using the Greenway and all this. They said, well, before the Greenway, we had to actually drive all these kids to school. So now we have a chance to walk and bike to school, which is a lot more fun for everyone and a big part of their daily routines. So, great benefit there. And I really wanted to focus on the cultural framework of building greenways when we think about different types of ethnicities and in America, and how they respond to what is honestly sort of a cultural framework from Northern Europe. Greenways and conservation have their roots in Dutch and German and English society. So it was really fun for me working in Miami when the Cuban American audience challenged me and said, Via Verde, Mr. Flink, why is the way green? Because I realized right then that talking about the conservation or environmental aspects of the Miami River Greenway didn't resonate with my Cuban American audience. So I was challenged to go look for a cultural framework that they would understand, they would embrace, they would get excited about. And I discovered the Malecón in Havana. And so I was able to come back and talk about the Malecón, which is a social landscape. It's a landscape where people go to date, where the men go play checkers, where families go for picnics, where family reunions are held. And I said, well, I came back to and talked with my Cuban American audience and said, well, we'd like to build the Malecón in Miami. And they got all excited. They, well, why did you say that in the first place? We'd love to have the Malecón in Miami. And it was a good lesson for me, and it's a good lesson for all of us, that we are this multi-ethnic country. We have people that have come from different parts of the world that don't see the landscape or community in the same way. And as landscape architects and designers, we really should be challenged to try to figure out a way to make these landscapes more relevant to the populations that we're dealing with. And for the last 6 years, I've been in Memphis, Tennessee, working on the Wolf River Greenway. We're building this through North Memphis neighborhoods, which are largely African American. We're the first major level of investment that's gone on in these communities in more than 50 years. It's not the #1 priority for the African American neighbors that we're working with, but they've come around to embrace the fact that it is important investment. And, we're able to reach out and involve the young people of these neighborhoods and these communities in important programming, connecting them with nature, connecting them with outdoors. Many of them really revel in it. They really support it. They understand the significance of having the Greenway, come through their neighborhoods. And it's been really rewarding, again, for me to have a chance to work in this way and bring such benefits to people who really need this benefit and their lives are going to be improved on a daily basis. So I know that your class is really focused on the Ohio River Recreational Trail. I've had a chance to talk with David and his committee, and it's really just a fantastic project. And I know it's going to have a lot of success going forward because of the people that are involved and all of the different entities from the National Park Service on down that are involved in the project. And it's interesting when you look at a river this big, you look at a project this long, and where do we have precedence in doing this? But one of the really big focuses of this endeavor is to tap into the outdoors economy, which is the 3rd largest economy in the nation. It's almost $1 billion of annual spending. It creates tons and tons of American jobs. It generates huge amounts of federal tax revenue, and it delivers local revenue back into local communities. So it's really a great project to work on in terms of connecting these Ohio River communities to the resource, and doing it with a greenway as a way of revealing economic opportunity, which many of these communities really need. And the activation strategies that you're going to choose have to be very intentional, have to be embraced by the communities, and they have to be easy to understand. Now, I chose to feature a story that I experienced going to Belarus. I don't know how many of you read that, but pretty interesting story given what's taking place right now in Belarus with the authoritarian regime, which actually was the same regime that invited me into the community, into the nation. So just to take that into consideration. But the largest trading partner of Belarus is Russia, and there's a lot to the politics there. The people of Belarus are fabulous, and the landscapes are spectacular. And here, this country is embracing a greenway strategy, and they're doing it to diversify their economy. So they're wanting to embrace ecotourism. They're wanting to embrace agritourism. And it struck me that, here I am in a country that has closed its borders to Western visitors and Western influence, and yet is trying to embrace a very Western philosophy of agritourism and ecotourism. And when I think about the American communities that can do this, without the restrictions that are going on in Belarus, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to really feature that story in the book, was to sort of put that juxtaposition out there to say, gosh, if this country understands the benefits of it, why aren't we understanding the benefits of agritourism and ecotourism for many of our Midwestern and more rural communities? So that was the reason for featuring that story. The final thing I'll focus on is yes, this fabulous vision of an interconnected greenway system for America. I look at this, and I'm glad one of the students brought it up. I look at this as a conversation that began 100 years ago, and that we're still having the conversation, and we've been interrupted in this conversation several times. For example, the span of time, almost 55, 60 years between the time that Manning finished his thesis on a national plan for America and envisioned this national greenway system, and Lyndon Johnson signing into law the National Trail System Act. Well, what happened in that period of time? Well, a lot. I mean, there was a Great Depression, there was 2 world wars, there was a Cold War. So you could make the argument that Americans were very distracted, rightfully so, with a lot of world problems that were going on. But here we came together, really probably 3 administrations, starting with the Eisenhower administration, then the Kennedy administration, and then Johnson, who's the president who signs this into law, this National Trail System Act. Well, that was sort of the legislative floor, if you will. That was the infrastructure to build on Manning's vision, to basically recognize that America is trail nation, that we were settled on the backs of all these corridors, the greatest continental migration that the world has ever seen, the east to west migration across America, and the establishment of all of these states, these lower 48 states. So we have that legislative, underpinning. And then along comes Ronald Reagan, a completely different president, a president who really began to talk about how the federal government was the problem, and this commission he appoints by executive order because his friend Lawrence Rockefeller convinces him to do this. And to be perfectly honest, Reagan wasn't really clued into as to what the commission was doing, but he set them off in motion. They come back with this report. And they basically defined that there needs to be a national greenway system in the United States of America. So this was a second major, initiative that took place. Well, Reagan was very disturbed by the findings of his commission. He did not like the term expand the federal estate. He kicks it to his vice president, George H.W. Bush, to finish the work of the commission, and he never endorses the work, but it's out there. Island Press publishes the President's Commission report, and another important building block is in place. And then Bush and Congress later come along in 1991, and they pass the greatest transformative act for surface transportation in the United States, ICE-T, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991. Well, that radically changed the funding formula and gave billions of dollars of funding support to the development of a national greenway system. And we're still benefiting from that today. 10 to 12, maybe even close to $15 billion have been spent since 1991 to build this national system of greenways. So we've had 3 important sort of national federal policy statements made in support of Warren Manning's vision. But what I would submit is that greenways are really local. And I think you'll appreciate this as you work on your various theses. They're really a system of local trails, which you've experienced. And then those local trails, come together in a regional framework. And then after that regional framework is established, like here, the Carolina Thread Trail, if you want to study regional frameworks, there's a number of them that you can study around the country. This regional framework is 14 counties and 1,500 miles, but it really consists of a whole bunch of local greenways. And then we look at state networks of greenways and trails. In North Carolina, we have the Mountains to Sea Trail, and we're also in the midst of planning the Great Trail State. So we're looking at all 100 counties in North Carolina and how greenways and trails are very important to the development of our state. And then you look at sort of why is that important? Well, we can boil it all down and mostly to economic opportunity. If we can create economic opportunity in all 100 counties through the development of trails and greenways, that really benefits our state and it benefits the communities that those are in. And then all this gets tied together by this long distance interstate network of trails and greenways, such as the East Coast Greenway or the Great American Rail Trail or other long distance trails that are part of the National Trail System today. And that's why I decided to feature a story on the East Coast Greenway, writing how that began. And I should let you all know that we're in the midst. There's a huge group of us all across the country, about 160 partners, organizations, and growing, to promote to Congress and the White House the need for a Greenway stimulus, to really focus on the need to embrace Manning's vision and to finish this system of national greenways. And it would really, be good for the economy, be good for the health of our country, for the ecosystems, and for the health of Americans. So what I envisioned, through all of this work and what I was trying to make the case for in the book is that we can build a resilient framework for nature and civilization using greenways as a way of achieving that. I think, most greenways are local. They almost have become America's Main Street, where a lot of us will go and will participate as human beings with other human beings, enjoy nature and the outdoors, really embrace the communities that we live in and the landscapes that we live in. But Charles Little just put it so well in the book that he wrote 30 years ago. To build a greenway is to build a community. And I believe that's what we're in the business of doing. And so as you think about taking this philosophy and you're working in these different communities up and down the Ohio River, I hope that you'll keep that in mind, that you're going to build a stronger, more sustainable, more resilient community through the work in greenways. And hopefully that we all gain an appreciation for the fact that this planet is our only home in the universe. And we need to, get to an ethic that people understand in daily life. How critically important it is for us to take care of the planet's ecosystems, because when we have healthy ecosystems, we have healthy human society. So thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance to get the book, it's available from a number of different resources, but thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. And I will stop my screen share and turn it back to the screen view to see if anybody has any questions.
Well, there's quite a number of questions, Chuck, in the chat, and you have a couple choices. You can just scroll through them, and as people think about what was said, please make sure you put your thoughts in the chat. They don't have to be questions. They could be comments or observations, or also think through what you saw in your river town. How was the Greenway? One of the questions I have is, how do the towns, it goes through multiple towns, and do the individual river towns have a similar response to them? Are they equally as supportive, or is there one major driver sometimes? And so how one gets into that political culture, because we all know every town is different. And so what happens when you have one town that's gung-ho, one town that, well, if it happens, it's okay. So feel free to post these things in the chat. And Chuck, what do you think about that question of the synergism of towns working together when there's a laggard in its midst.
You know, it's interesting to me, David, that you went to the University of North Dakota, because that's where my dad went to school.
Oh,
And
really?
so, yeah, so he's a North Dakota graduate as well. So my dad, who was a farmer and grew up in the Depression, and his favorite saying to me, which is stuck with me all my life, was, "Chuck, what one person considers a weed, another person considers a flower, and vice versa." And so when you're dealing with these different communities up and down the Ohio River, you know, how do we get them all, you know, to consider the merits of something that, you know, for on the face value, they may not understand. And so I think one of the ways that I've had success in doing this, and there was a lot of questions here about Grand Forks, you know, how did we turn the corner on Grand Forks? Well, I really began focusing on the economic benefit, because I figured that flower and weed argument, and David, you know this because you were there. That flower and weed argument, I was going to lose the argument on that. But when I talked about economy, I got at least more people under the tent, more people interested. Like, okay, tell me more about this. How are we going to benefit? And I was able to say, you know, in Grand Forks, you're on the North American Flyway. Did you know that? And they said, what's the North American Flyway? I said, well, there's millions and millions of migrating birds that, you know, fly up and down. And, you know, that really resonated with folks in the region. And we talked about, for example, the economic benefit of bird watching, which they didn't know. And we really began to frame how this would benefit the community. And the fact of the matter is, it has. You know, it's made Grand Forks a destination community in the upper Midwest. It's made them be able to attract business and industry to their community. It's retained more young people who believe in their town now for the first time. They believe that they want to stay there, that they want to find employment in Grand Forks, that they want to get married and raise their children in Grand Forks. These things did not exist before we went up there and did the Greenway. So the Greenway has become this landscape that has brought a lot of people, you know, off the weed and flower argument, and they've all rallied together. And so that would be my one recommendation on these communities. Find the passion of each of these communities along the Ohio River, and don't get them to focus on their differences, but get them to focus on what they might agree to. So that would be, you know, one strategy.
You know, just an interesting thing with the University of North Dakota, you always have to sort of understand that there's lots of people who have been there, who have thought about these issues, even though they didn't come to pass. A Kentuckian became president of the University of North Dakota, and Charles Kupchella. And Charles Kupchella, he was president there from '99 to 2008. And interestingly, he wrote he was a Kentuckian and went up there in North Dakota, but he was the author of the most used environmental science textbook in the United States at colleges. And so even though here you had the president of the university who was an environmentalist, you know, extraordinaire, still having these issues, and you talk about the public reaction to it. It's just a strange deal in many ways.
Yeah. I have a question from Katie that I'd love to get into, and that's with respect to African American communities such as West Louisville. You know, the first opportunity I had to work in a African American community was with Dr. Charles Fountain, who was a Black landscape architect, very well known, very, very highly regarded from Michigan State University. And Charles called me up one day and invited me to come and work with him in Greensboro, North Carolina, Southeast Greensboro, where when you looked at systemic racism and its impact on Southeast Greensboro, it was very evident where all the investment was going to go was into the white suburbs. You know, it was just a classic definition of how American society has dealt with communities of color and in particular African American communities. And we got into discussions with the neighborhood, and of course greenways were not very high on their list of things to do. And Charles was adamant, and he said, you know, if you look at it, let's just focus on the health and wellness of the African American. Let's look at because, you know, being African American himself, he said, let's look at our unique health profile. You know, we're highly susceptible to high blood pressure, to heart disease, to certain types of cancer. And he went down this long list, and he goes, you know, part of our problem is that when you say outdoors, you know, to African Americans, there's this sort of, you know, they rebel against it because of slavery. You know, they don't, and so, you know, I'm trying to talk about being outdoors, being exercising, and being more health and wellness focused by having a better outdoor environment. And you're objecting to that because of cultural definitions, cultural bias that's built in. So, you know, I felt like we definitely can address the health and wellness of communities of color. I remember going and working with the Cherokee tribe up in the North Carolina mountains, who you know, had high incidence of diabetes that was prevalent in the population. And you know, they came to us and said, you know, we need an outdoor landscape where we can walk and exercise for health and wellness, because we're told by our medical community that an active outdoor lifestyle is a great deterrent to diabetes. So you know, there's a lot of ways of addressing the health and wellness of communities, especially communities of color, and especially during these times. It's difficult. It's a difficult conversation to have because not everyone is going to understand that right away. But that has been one of the real focuses for us in doing our work in communities of color all across the United States, is to focus on the health and wellness benefits, and how that manifests itself down to the individual. You know, that you actually can control your health and wellness by being more active and participating in the outdoor environment. So I'm really glad you asked that question, and that's kind of how I've dealt with that. And so I've got a couple questions in that regard. Someone mentioned about, you know, getting the folks, how did you overcome the objections to the Greenway in Grand Forks? And, you know, we try to look at the variety of benefits I've sort of mentioned in the book and use all of those. But I will tell you that after, you know, 3 years of just sort of standing there waving my arms around and talking and showing pictures of other communities, you know, it didn't resonate until the Greenway was built. And I've had that experience in a lot of different communities where, you know, we had to build it so people could see. And honestly, I've gone back, I participated in grand openings, I've seen those same people. They've come up to me and they've said, oh my gosh, we had no idea this is what you were talking about. You know, so you kind of want to go bang your head against the wall going, yeah, but this is exactly what we were talking about. So I think as you guys are dealing with this subject in the communities that you're working in, there's no substitute for doing the field trips that David has taken you on, taking people to different places and say, this is the landscape we're trying to create in your community. You know, if there's some backlash, or if there's some folks who just, you know, don't quite get it. All right, international experience. I love the international experience. I've traveled to China, I've traveled to Europe, I've traveled to South America, all of this to discuss greenways and to make presentations on greenways to get feedback. And it's been fascinating. And the world views greenways different than the American model of greenways, but also likes to embrace the American model of greenways. So I really love this question of how we can learn, because I just had a conversation yesterday with a group of philanthropic organizations, and they were asking about how we can make greenways more appealing to communities of color, you know, in terms of making them more welcoming and more inviting. And we discussed signage. And I made the point, if you go to Europe, you'll see signs in multiple languages. But in the United States, we have this deference to English only. And in fact, you hear stories of people getting upset over here, just sitting and listening to a conversation that's in another language and going up and being very upset. No, you're in the United States, you need to speak English. Whereas in Europe, for example, you know, they don't insist that, you know, you speak a particular language. They're trying to make different cultures welcomed in their communities. And so I think that's one of the things that we can do, is we can start making those kinds of inroads into making more people feel welcomed in these landscapes. David, I know we're at 10:30 and I don't know how much time we have left. with the students, so I didn't want to run over.
How about another 5 or 10 minutes, and we only have really one announcement at the end.
Okay.
And so if somebody wants to interrupt and turn their microphone on and turn their camera on and ask a question in person, you certainly can. Or Chuck, just continue on down this list. There's quite a number of...
Yeah, there's some really good questions. The Louisville Loop, you know, that's really a fascinating project, and I'm really glad that Russ brought it up and David brought it up. That's a concept that is about at least 30 years old, if not older, and there has been a lot of incremental progress that's been made, and it's kind of one of those things where people need to understand the whole of that conversation and not its component parts, and how important it is not just to the community itself, but also the ability to make Louisville a even more attractive destination community by having that loop completed. So to me, the story is about investment in return, or return on investment. And if the Louisville Jefferson County community would make the investment in completing that loop, and then begin to really market that loop is available, think about the impact to tourism that would have. I mean, most of these projects pay for themselves in a very short amount of time. And so I think the return on investment is very high, and I think you would see that return happen very quickly. So I'm glad that you brought that question up, because I think
Chuck,
it can be happening.
Chuck, a question in reference to the Louisville Loop. It also could be used as a case of environmental justice. For an example, in Louisville, the first section of it was built through the west end of Louisville. Then the Jones family and Parklands of Floyd's Fork built that outer part, $150 million. Unfortunately, when they started building, or our community started building, the eastern section through the more affluent section, we closed down the Louisville Loop through the west end of Louisville. And in part because of the Ohio River flooding it and causing damage, but it's been closed 10 years now, and no plans to open it up. And so the community sort of views it as, well, the East End gets a beautiful brand new trail, even though it's a lot philanthropic. The West End had a trail built and not maintained, and it's not being maintained. Right. And so, you know, could you talk just a little bit about the responsibility of long-term maintenance, but also this whole environmental justice piece where the grass is mowed in the East End, and we can't shovel the dirt off of the path after the flood?
Yep. We're having the same discussion, by the way, in St. Louis. So we've been hired by the Great Rivers Greenway District, which is building a regional greenway system in St. Louis. And there's huge amounts of concern over the disparity of maintenance of greenways that are built in low to moderate income communities versus high income communities. And they're asking us, how do we solve this problem? Because I'm experiencing the same thing with the built greenway that we're building in Memphis. We're having difficulties with the city of Memphis, fulfilling their commitment to maintenance and operations. And it's a problem all across this country. So it's not unique to Louisville. It's not unique to your West End. And the way that we're suggesting right now, the early sort of recommendations we have in St. Louis is that there really needs to be, from the wealthier aspects of the St. Louis community, a dedicated fund, for maintenance to even out the disparity of funding that supports maintenance. The reason that you're not getting the West End, greenways shoveled off is because most likely there's not funding or resources to do that. And so people drop the ball on purpose. The reason that you're getting higher levels of maintenance on the East End is because there are that philanthropic support. There is the money to continue to employ the maintenance crews and to do that level of maintenance. So it is a national problem in this country. We are, by our nature, a capitalistic society. We like to build things. And also by our nature, we are not good at taking care of the stuff we build. I mean, that you can see that everywhere in the United States. And so, you know, it is a problem for greenway systems. And it's one of those that we're going to have to figure out strategies going forward. And it's, by the way, it's completely against capitalism, a capitalistic society, to sit there and say, let's share the wealth. That's what people refer to as socialism. You know, some people go so far as to say that's communism. Well, the truth of the matter is we do live in a socialistic society, whether people want to admit it or not. You know, it's socialistic, capitalistic, you know, blend. And if we're gonna even this out, and we're gonna make the Louisville Loop a greenway that can be experienced throughout its entire length, and it has the same kind of look, you know, and feel and condition to it, we're going to have to figure out the disparity in funding that happens across a city, which is very typical, and figure out how to even that out by having appropriate funding set aside to handle that maintenance. So that's the challenge. It's a lot easier to talk about it than it is to actually implement it, but it's a problem shared by a lot of cities. We have a question here from Sean about creating more greenways in crowded urban areas. And, you know, it's interesting. You talk about, do you think there's a future of artificial parks? What we are seeing, Sean, is cities willing to tackle really, really gnarly, gritty, tough sort of landscapes and transform them. You know, the Miami River Greenway is a great example of this. What they've done, Sean, is that they've taken the river landscape and they've created what they call pop-up landscapes. So they've created a fairly benign landscape that is really simple, not very articulated, and capable of supporting pop-up events so that you can go in and design an event for that landscape. And it's really, I think it's one of those innovations that's happening in city design, that we don't have a landscape that's fully articulated to be a particular type of urban park, or you know, with some sort of level of benches and plazas and trees and grass and shrubs and flowers and all that kind of stuff. But they sort of recognize that there has to be these landscapes that are capable of being tailored to fit a particular event. So the pop-up landscapes along the Miami River can support you watching an outdoors Miami Dolphins game, or they could support a black tie event at night, you know, under tents. I think it's a really cool thing. And I think as you look across cities that are doing urban greenways today, I think what you're seeing is a lot of innovation in design, and a lot of people recognizing that that landscape that we would not have traditionally tackled, we're going to go ahead and tackle it. We're going to do an underline, you know, which is going on in Miami, or we're going to do a high line in New York. You know, so we're getting a lot of innovation, and I think it's fun. I think it's very creative, and I think it's a way of the future. You know what I'll do, David, because we have a lot of questions, and I've copied the chat, and because I have to run, what I'm going to do, if it's okay, is I will go ahead and take the chat and send you some answers to some of the questions that we did not cover, so you can distribute that to the students, if that's acceptable to you.
Well, that would be perfect. That's above and beyond. And I wish to thank you. And Russ, do you have any final comments before I make our last announcement?
Just one final comment. I would encourage the students to think a lot about, Mr. Flink mentioned that one of his greenways linked a bunch of schools together.
Yeah.
And when he was showing the pictures of parents taking a large group of kids, that's called a walking school bus. And in Jefferson County, for the JCPS, we have over 100,000 students. Half of them get to school by bus, which is pretty inefficient, actually, because most of the buses are not running at anywhere near capacity. But more importantly, half of the students get there by car, and almost nobody gets there by bike or walking. So if we can link the schools as nodes of here's where people are going to, hopefully we can move getting kids more inclined to walk or bike to school, I had the privilege of going to Austria to study their sustainability measurements. I visited a school there, and the first thing that blew me away was there are about 400 bicycles around the school. If any of you went to Jefferson County Public Schools, I've never seen a bike at any school. And so hopefully we can start changing. It will be not only beneficial for health reasons, but it's also beneficial for environmental reasons. So we have an opportunity, or you have an opportunity, to maybe make some of those suggestions and use the Greenway to link schools to the communities.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed spending an hour with you today, and I certainly wish you guys all the best. Russ, thanks for those observations and your comments. Couldn't agree more. And David, thanks as always. And I'll look forward to staying in touch with you, David, and certainly wish everybody the best as you continue throughout the semester.
Well, if you do have time, this Sunday, we're taking a little field trip to our first state nature preserve, or second state nature preserve. And it's an island, if everybody sees my screen. So this is our little process right here. This used to be a farm. It was inhabited for many years. Interestingly, it was about 6 times the size of it now, you know. So when we think of it, and that's when the Army Corps of Engineers finished off building the lock and dam down in 1964, it raised the height of the pool by 10 feet. So this island used to be 6 times the size, but we'll get out and walk around on it. We're gonna paddle, we're gonna meet right here at Duffy's Landing. And if you zoom out a little bit, here is the Big 4 Bridge, the interstate highway. 2nd Street Bridge is free if you go across that, and then you just drive upstream. And Chuck, you know, I don't know if you've heard of this part right here, but this is a 95-acre tract of land that was the oldest inland boat building facility in North America.
Wow.
Started in 1820s, and it closed down last year.
Okay.
And they're in the process of removing. So you think about brownfields.
Yep.
But here you have almost a 100-acre going to be abandoned piece of property that could drive our relationship with the river. So we're going to put in right upstream of that at Duffy's Landing, run by Jeffersonville Park Department, and paddle up here along the edge and go check out 6 Mile Island.
Fantastic.
Once again, if you cannot be there this weekend, please email me by Friday. I understand. Text me if you have a problem over the weekend, but we need to figure out our canoes. So if you cannot be there by, let me know tomorrow or by tomorrow. Chuck, thank you very much for your time and energy and thoughts.
Thank you.
And we look forward to working with you, and we'll get you back. Students are going to write a short reaction paper, and I'll get you those copies so you see what people say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
All right. Bye.